evolution and experience of the physical world. Well, Bill and Mary, these are two New Thought religious science type people, they were moving from New York to Santa Barbara, to California. And, you know, Mary loves fish. I mean, she's a fisher. She loves fish. And they've never experienced fishing on the ocean. She has nothing to, no way, how would you do that? So they decided when they got to Santa Barbara, let's go part of this charter that takes these professional fishermen out on the lake, out on the ocean, and do some fishing. So they went and rented some tackle and gear, and they boarded this boat with several other seasoned fishermen, and they laughed at the equipment they had. The pole was not the right pole, and they just giggled to pieces. And so then Bill, her husband, says, Reverend Bill, he says, I don't think we're going to catch anything after listening to these guys. I don't even know why I'm here. You know, this is ridiculous. And Mary, being a nice wife, a good wife, now, Bill, you need to practice what you preach. If you think you're not going to catch fish, you're not going to catch fish. And to be very frank with you, I want fish. I'm tired of not having fish. I want us to experience fish. So you need to change your attitude. And you have to have faith. The fishermen are just rolling in the aisles. They're laughing. You don't catch fish with faith. What is that all about? You catch fish if you have the right tackle and you know you have the skills to catching fish. And they're all giggling and laughing, and almost to the point that they were crying. So anyway, Mary said, okay, no problem. So she goes to the place where she was assigned. I don't know if you've ever been on one of those charters, but they assign you a certain place. So she goes to the railing, and she's just focusing. She's visualizing. She's using the tools of the magnificent, the tools of spirit, the tools of the supreme. She's visualizing fish coming to her. Just visualizing it. And she wouldn't be... Anyway, in the meantime, it's been about an hour. And the fishermen started grumbling. You know, if we take these numbskulls in here, they're poisoning the atmosphere with their non-knowledge. They don't know what they're doing, and it's making things worse for us. And she's just focusing on the thing. And all of a sudden, she gets a fish, a beautiful fish. And then another one, and then another one. And they're paying notice. So Bill goes over and says, what are you doing? She said, I'm just following our belief system. I'm visualizing. So I'm going to try that. So he goes back to his place, and he visualizes catching the biggest fish of anybody in the boat. And sure enough, he catches the biggest fish of anybody in the boat. And so the rest of the tour out there was these two New Thought ministers teaching a bunch of secular fishermen how the New Thought belief system works when you're part of and accepting the fact that you are a supreme being. And isn't that good? It's quite comfortable. There was an article, and I'll wind this down eventually. There was an article in the Fresno Bee, this was last week. How many of you saw this? And the title was, I wrote it down here, the title was that visualization to accept your goals, visualization and visualizing your goals before you set out. Always visualize your goals before you set out. Anybody read that in the Bee? Anybody? Nobody reads the Bee. I don't know if we should print that.
Delete.
It said that, and this McKay said that visualization is the most powerful means of achieving personal goals. The most powerful. This goes on to say that most people, most athletes, and most celebrities have used visualization for their own successes. And so what I like about that article, it's going mainstream. Our belief system seems to be going mainstream. Just last week. And so it listed as an example actor Jim Carrey. How many of you know about Jim Carrey? Jim Carrey in 1987 wrote a check to himself for $10 million. He dated a check 1995, Thanksgiving 1995. That was his visualization, and he visualized that. And he put on the tape, on the check, for services rendered through acting. That's all he put down. Pretty new at it. Well, by Thanksgiving in 1995, he received a check for $10 million to to pay him for acting in the film Dumb and Dumber. Anybody see that? The article also went on to talk about Oprah Winfrey, as always in her shows, always used visualization, and she talked about the subconscious a lot. But the thing that I really liked about the article, it had to do with the Russians in their survey. What they did a research study using some Olympic runners, and they divided these Olympic runners, and there were a lot of them, into 4 different groups. And they wanted to study what the effect of training would be. So the first group, 100% physical training, 100%. The second group, 75% physical training, 25% mental training. The third group, 50% physical training, 50% mental training. The fourth group, 25% physical, 75% mental. Isn't that incredible? Guess what group won? The fourth group. They did the best, where they spend most of their time connecting to Source, spending most of the time visualizing their successes, and it paid off for them. So I'm going to close with a story that I created just for today that will help us wrap up today's first talk in New Year's, and maybe be a little metaphor for the rest of the month. It has to do with an airplane and some pilots. These people were on the aircraft and they were ready to take off, and all of a sudden the pilot himself got sick. But what's ironic about this, the co-pilot also got a message, an emergency message on his cell phone that said his wife was just taken to the hospital. Okay? Think about this. So the pilot and co-pilot, they weren't available. So the airlines called in some substitutes. And so what they called in, and they waited, these people were getting very impatient. They're waiting for the substitute pilots to show up. So finally, they come. And they come into the door, and one of the substitute pilots had a seeing eye dog. And he had on his elbow the co-pilot who was leading, the co-pilot who had a white and red cane. And they're walking, they go into the cockpit. Oh my God, everyone went nuts in this airplane. My God, is this the best they can do for substitutes? This has got to be joking. They're not going to do this, are they? And the people are grumbling and all that. And the pilot said, "Be ready for takeoff. Prepare for takeoff." And so they started taking off, and the plane started gathering up speed, you know all this, when they're ready to take off, gathering up speed, gathering up speed, and finally, ah! Everybody screams on the airplane. And it was just enough time to where the pilot was able to pull back on the yoke, and without inches to spare in the runway, the plane took off. Mike, the pilot, looked at it, because spoke to Bill and said, "Bill, one of these days, they're going to scream too late." And we're all going to die! You like that? I thought that was really good. And so, what's the moral of the story? And here it is, there's a connection here. If we are blind to the source of what we are, then we are dependent on those other folks and circumstances for our own success. If we're going to take off, it's a bad gamble, and I don't think it's worth the try. And so on.